The Democracy Forum is a not-for-profit organisation founded in 2009 under the patronage of Baroness Nicholson of Winterbourne. Its principal goal was to work for the furtherance of democracy, peace and the rule of law in order to counter religious fundamentalism and intolerance in our global communities. In an increasingly fractured world, this goal continues to be the driving force behind all of the Forum's activities. Lord Charles Bruce is the current president of the Forum. Since its inception, the Forum has hosted and co-hosted seminars on a wide variety of topics relating to democracy and human rights across the world. The Democracy Forum encourages academics, students, journalists and other socially and politically conscious people to attend our seminars and to participate in the question and answer session. Details are available on our website, thedemocracyforumlimited.com.
Lord Bruce, President of the Democracy Forum, invites you to attend our next virtual seminar on Tibet, new socio-political developments in an international context. The event will be moderated by former BBC Asia correspondent Humphrey Hawksley, and panelists include Dr. Lobsang Sangay, Apolamo, Kate Saunders, Tim Loughton MP. The webinar will open with an introduction to the topic by Lord Bruce, closing remarks by Barry Gardner MP, Chair of the Democracy Forum.
Welcome everybody, thank you for being here. This is going to be a fascinating and intriguing discussion, argument, debate about Tibet. The new socio-political developments in an international context. I'm Humphrey Hawksley. I'm your moderator, a former BBC and Asia correspondent. And before we get into the details of the panelists, which come from as far afield as Dharamsala in India, New Delhi and Sussex in England, I'm going to hand you over to a video from Lord Charles Bruce, who is going to encapsulate what we'll be speaking about.
Welcome to this webinar, which the Democracy Forum is hosting this afternoon. For those of you who are familiar with our seminars or follow the excellent coverage provided by our sister publication, Asian Affairs Magazine, you will not be surprised to learn that this year we have increased our scrutiny of China. Although we were forced to cancel a seminar in the spring, which would have exposed China's treatment of its minorities, a video conference which we hosted last month on the strategic objectives that lie behind China's foreign policy was well received. I'd like to thank the team at the Democracy Forum for making this webinar possible. We're very grateful that Humphrey Hawksley has yet again agreed to chair the panel, and I'm delighted that all the panelists whom we originally approached have agreed to take part. This afternoon, we look candidly at the fate of Tibet. Although Tibet has suffered the effects of occupation for over 70 years, its plight became the focus for international opprobrium in 1989, when the country was rocked by protests and Lhasa was in the grip of martial law. In a speech delivered in Oslo that year, marking his acceptance of the Nobel Peace Prize, the Dalai Lama addressed an international audience still shocked by the evident brutality which confronted the students demonstrating in Tiananmen Square. His Holiness revealed the never-ending suffering of his people, forced to endure a calculated and systematic strategy aimed at the destruction of their national and cultural identities. But it's clear now that Tibet has become a model for the apparatus of Chinese state repression, a dystopian process consisting of 4 elements, as The Economist neatly paraphrases: deflecting international pressure, limiting foreign contact, monitoring and interference, swamping a territory's native majority with economic development and internal migration, and blanketing it with surveillance mechanisms and personnel. Indeed, Tibet's experience provides a chilling lesson in this form of coercive and systemic intimidation. Yu Shikun, president of the Taiwan legislature, wrote in the Times newspaper yesterday that the Chinese Communist Party has suppressed and persecuted religious practitioners, ruled Tibet with an iron fist, imprisoned Uyghurs in Xinjiang, and stamped out democracy in Hong Kong. But this year, however, the international community is becoming much more confident in naming and shaming China's treatment of Tibet. In June, an international panel of special rapporteurs urged the United Nations Human Rights Council to take decisive action to evaluate all violations of human rights and to set up an independent and impartial process at the highest level to monitor and report annually on the unfolding situation. In addition, all member states and United Nations agencies have been urged clearly to demonstrate their disapproval of China's disregard for human rights by cooperating to leverage economic and political pressure where it's most effective. In January, the United States Congress passed the Tibetan Policy and Support Act to prevent Chinese officials from interfering in the succession of Tibetan Buddhist leaders. A further bill was introduced by Congressman Scott Perry in May to authorize the US to recognize the Tibet Autonomous Region as a separate independent country. And at a recent Westminster Hall debate, British parliamentarians from across the political spectrum lined up to criticize the Chinese Communist Party for deliberately attempting to eliminate Tibetans' cultural identity and to erase forever their ethnicity. A research paper commissioned by the Interparliamentary Alliance on China has indeed exposed the existence of this Orwellian policy, which is forcing the resettlement of small farmers and rural labourers, their re-education, to eradicate backward thinking. In the first 7 months of this year, over 500,000 Tibetans were removed from their homes and sent to labour transfer camps under strict military supervision, following a programme of state suppression already well underway in Xinjiang. Perhaps the most insidious and mendacious attack on the integrity of the Tibetan people has been the Chinese subversion of their Buddhist faith and systems of belief. The cruel deception which obscures the fate of the 11th Panchen Lama, who disappeared without trace in 1995, has now been compounded by a plan to supplant the legitimate successor to the Dalai Lama. In an interview granted to Reuters in March last year, His Holiness observed that although China is a great nation, an ancient nation, its political system is a totalitarian system. There's no freedom. He added, "Our strength, our power is based on truth. Chinese power is based on the gun. For the short term, the gun is more decisive, but in the long term, truth is more powerful."
Thank you, Lord Bruce, for encapsulating that so concisely and in a fairly dystopian way. What I've realized is that in the past, as we learn about these flashpoints, as it were, of Chinese expansion and repression, Xinjiang camps, Hong Kong, South China Sea, it seems that Tibet, which is from a previous generation, has sort of fallen off that list, as it were. And I was very glad to hear how much attention is being paid to it. And we're going to look at that now. There's also the Chinese argument that I hope we can address through our panelists here. And I'll try and explain that another way. I was in a group of people and somebody had just driven up from Cornwall here in the southwest of England, complaining about the winding roads and the narrowness of the roads. And somebody said, yes, that's because the Romans never got there. And where you are in a section of England or Britain where the Romans got you have your straight roads there where they just pushed through communities and villages to build the infrastructure 2,000 years ago. Where the Romans didn't get, you had to go around the villages so that you didn't upset those communities. There is this issue, and you'll hear it a lot in Beijing, about modernization, infrastructure building, and healthcare, set against what we call repression and the conserving of religion and culture. And that is very much the Chinese argument that we're hearing, and that Lord Bruce tells us there is now, and we've all seen it, a pushback against. We're going to be debating all these issues. I have one thing to announce is that Barry Gardiner, chair of the Democracy Forum, Labour MP and former Shadow International Trade Secretary, can't make it for his usual insightful summing up. He's been called to a committee meeting in the British Parliament, but we can live with that. And just to go through the panelists again, I'm going to read from the bottom up. Kate Saunders, who I've worked with over the years on Tibet, independent specialist researcher and writer, will look at the latest trends, but particularly the military-style training and labor transfers that are sort of being associated with what we're hearing is happening in Xinjiang. Tim Lawton, Conservative MP and co-chair of the parliamentary group, all-party parliamentary group on Tibet, is going to tell us about the US Reciprocal Access to Tibet Act, which he's going to try to bring into the parliament here, and the parliamentary discussions that are going on currently about Tibet. Apalamo from New Delhi, the School of International Studies at the Jawaharlal Nehru University, is going to talk about China, social stability and security measures that are being put in Tibet there. And we're going to start with Dr. Lobsang Sangay, who's talking to us from Dharamsala, where the Tibetan government in exile is. He's president of the Central Tibetan Administration. And Dr. Lobsang Sangay is going to start with an overview of what he sees as the current situation in Tibet and the encroachment of China into India and Nepal. So Dr. Lobsang Sangay, the screen is yours.
Oh, thank you very much, Mr. Humphrey, for the kind introduction, and Democracy Forum for the privilege. Actually, I'm here at a quarantine center because I just returned from the US yesterday, and this is the Tibetan Administration Quarantine Center. So given the importance of the forum, I am taking part in it. So thank you very much, Lord Bruce, for your kind introduction of the forum. But I didn't quite get to hear you because of the technical issue. And only thing that I heard is that you said Beijing has guns, but guns, ultimately will not succeed. Truth will prevail, and we also, abide by that principle. And His Holiness the Dalai Lama always says, ultimately truth will prevail and justice will prevail in Tibet. That's why we pursue the path of nonviolence. Number one, I just want to make a point to say that why we have this virtual, webinar is because we have Wuhan originated virus has created this pandemic all over the world, and hence now we cannot meet in person. And the economic downturn, the social tension, and major changes, the new normal, that is dominating the world, or rather creating so much of an uncertainties and discomfort to the people, is primarily because of the Wuhan virus. So we should not forget that, and we should clearly blame where it's due. So yes, the Chinese government was trying to hide the truth of the pandemic, and according to major international organization, we lost anywhere from 3 to 6 weeks of information. And had we gotten the information on time, 95% of the pandemic and the death could have been prevented. That's primarily because China doesn't have democracy, China doesn't have transparency, and the Chinese government doesn't share the information, even related to health, to the international community. Number two, Tibetans, with the blessings of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, we practice democracy. My position is elected by Tibetans all over the world. And we have a parliament which functions like any other parliament, perhaps, better debate even compared to, House of Lords or House of Commons. I'm trying to poke fun, because in the 10-day session, I had to answer nearly 300 questions ex tempo from the member of parliament, and I had to answer them right then and there on live television. So this is how we conduct our parliament. So that way it's a robust democracy in exile, which is a model that could be replicated by refugees and other conflict areas. That even refugees, you can run your own government. You can help your own people. Even the COVID-19 treatment center, the way we address is very good, even compared to many independent countries. So that's how democracy always works, and China is a threat to democracy and transparency. And I have said this in 2018, which was said by the Secretary of State Mike Pompeo a few months ago. That is, either we transform China or China will transform you. So that is the challenge before us, a challenge of philosophy, challenge of ideology, a challenge of different mindset and how to deal with things. And the recent border incursion in India, the border of India by Chinese military army, has really forced the debate in the subcontinent. The Chinese army has entered into various parts of Indian border, and there was face-off between the two. Now almost 30 plus thousands of Chinese soldiers are facing 30 plus thousands of Indian soldiers at the border. Now this is very important, because when Tibet was an independent country, there was never an inch of land border between India and China. It was border between India and Tibet and China. So after the occupation of Tibet as the buffer zone between these two giants disappeared, and hence militarization of Tibet took place, and hence the military presence at the border of India, Nepal, Bhutan, touching Pakistan, even Southeast Asian countries, has raised this alarm now, because when two of the largest populated countries, two of the largest military are facing each other, and there could be violence. In fact, there was a violence when 20 Indian soldiers were brutally killed by Chinese soldiers, and it has raised a lot of debate within India and the continent of South Asia. So the problem is, when Tibet was an independent country, it acted as the buffer zone, and it was the zone of peace. And when Tibet was independent, we had only 75 Tibetan soldiers guarding the border with India. Now, it was a peaceful zone. Now, after we lost our country, the tension that we see in the subcontinent is very real. So hence, unless you address the issue of Tibet, you cannot address the issue of Indo-China tension. Another point, Tibet is a major source of water or rivers for the whole of continent. Actually, the Indus River, Satluj River flow from Tibet to India to Pakistan, Brahmaputra River from Tibet to India to Bangladesh, and Salween River, Irrawaddy to Southeast Asia, and Yangtze River, Mekong River flow from Tibet to China. So it's a major source of water as well. But China has conveniently not signed the UN Convention on Water Sharing, and they are not obligated to share water with people downstream. Now, Tibet is a source of water for 1.4 billion people in the continent. Now, if China controls the flow of water by constructing all these major dams, it affects millions and millions of people downstream, and it's already doing so. So this is also another flashpoint, because we know in Asia, they are facing water crisis. China has, 19% of the world population, but only, 12% of fresh water, which means 7% or 400 or so million Chinese are already facing water scarcity. And the situation in India is worse. Situation in whole of South Asia is very bad, in Southeast Asia too. So hence, it could be another flashpoint. So hence, it's not just the border, the land border we're talking about, also the river as a source of problem. And then the situation inside Tibet is very, repressive. And then I'm sure my colleagues, Kate Saunders and Apol Hamu will talk more about it. You know, just recently, Arvind Zen, the author of the report on Xinjiang, 1 million Xinjiang youth or generally population put in.
Have we lost him? I think that we've lost him. I hope we get him back, and I hope it's not.
I'm back.
Welcome back. Please continue.
Yes, the author of the 1 million people in concentration camp in Xinjiang, Arvind Zen, has come out with another report saying 500,000 Tibetans are also put in concentration camp-like situation, where villages and nomadic areas were given quotas, and they have to fill these quotas to bring Tibetan youth to urban setting where they are put in jail-like situation, and they are given quote unquote livelihood skills in military drill like system. This is done in the name of poverty elevation. The ambassador of China has tweeted very proudly saying that more than 600,000 Tibetans were given livelihood training in the name of poverty elevation. Why I say this is all the China experts, including United Nations, praise China for poverty elevation projects for being very, very successful. But for Tibetans and Uyghurs and Mongolians, poverty elevation means uprooting Tibetan youth from their culture, from their family members, from traditional livelihood to military-like setting, and then drill them, skills, quote unquote skills, essentially to synthesize them, essentially to assimilate them into Chinese, culture, and make them more Chinese, and so that way make Tibet into a Chinese province or a Chinatown. So poverty elevation for Tibetan means completely different from what it means to Chinese government. This is very important because all the UN agencies, China experts justify Chinese government, actions on poverty elevation. Thereby, they are also justifying repression of the Tibetan people or cultural assimilation of the Tibetan people. This, I say this with major concern because if you look at the 15 UN agencies, 4 or 5 are headed by Chinese officials, and other agencies also have Chinese personnel in very important positions. They are trying to restructure United Nations. They are trying to redefine human rights, and poverty elevation is an essential component of human rights. That's what Chinese government is trying to do. If they succeed, then the uprooting of 500,000 Tibetan youth and 1 million Tibetan Uyghurs in concentration camps will be justified. So this, I think, we all need to know, and we all should be, alarmed, and we all should raise this at every forum possible. So these are the things I just want to raise, and hence I want to end by saying, yes, unless you, transform China, China will transform you. So this is the biggest challenge for the whole world. So when we talk about Tibetans and Uyghurs and the Mongolians, we are no more talking about us only. We are talking about people in the United Kingdom, people in Europe, people in America, because the Chinese government or the Communist Party tentacles are already inside your country, and they are influencing you, including the international agencies, to their liking, to their way of thinking, to their mindset, which is definitely a threat to democracy and human rights that we know. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that. It's fascinating. I have one question of my own, and then a very interesting question has come in. I just want to say to everybody around the world here, we're getting some great stuff coming in saying what a great speech this was and what a fascinating topic. Give us your questions, challenge us, Give us your insights. We'll post them up, and if we've time, we'll put them out and ask the panelists. I just wanted to clarify one thing with you, Dr. Sangay. Were you saying that when the Chinese speak about poverty alleviation, they are actually talking about repression, or was it more nuanced than that?
No, when they're talking about poverty alleviation of Tibetans and Uyghurs and Mongolians, it's essentially 90% is assimilation, 90% is repression. So that we should know. Even from their figure of 500,000 Tibetans given skills, you will see 30,000 or so were, given some kind of employment, and 3,000 or 4,000 were sent to various parts of China. But still, more than 500,000 Tibetans were uprooted from their cultural setting, from the nomadic traditional areas. Now their urban setting, what is happening to them? They will be put in ghetto-like situation, and they will not have trainings and skills per se, and then they have nowhere to go. So their livelihood is destroyed, and they are assimilated. That's how they destroy Tibetan culture.
Thank you. One question that's come in from Yutan Funsok. I hope I've pronounced that roughly right. Indian scholars and senior politicians are calling out for India to walk away from China's from the One China policy. And just to clarify that is a policy about recognizing Taiwan and not recognizing China, or vice versa. Does your government support the ending of the One China policy?
You rightly said, One China policy originated for or because of Taiwan. Now, in recent years, if you look at the bilateral agreements between India and China, India doesn't mention One China policy because at one time, the foreign minister of China visited India, and the late foreign minister of India had a discussion, and the foreign minister of China, Wang Yi, asked for One China policy, and then foreign minister of India said, what about One India policy? And China said, we don't know about it. And since then, India does not mention One China policy in their bilateral agreements. So yes, Taiwan is asking for the review of One China policy. And I would also, support that, and ask Indian leadership to look into it.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I'm going to ask you one more question that has just come in, and then we're going to go to Apu Lamu, who's going to talk more about the security measures in Tibet and give us some detail on that. But the question that's come in and says, and I'll ask it, does any government in the world recognize your government? And obviously, which governments would you like to recognize you at the top there?
That's true. We are, CTA, we are known as government exile, and no government formally recognized us. But thankfully, I just came from Washington, D.C., and finally, I was formally invited and entered the State Department and met with the Assistant Secretary, and who is also the special coordinator for Tibetan issues. So for the last, after 60 years, I have entered the State Department. Thereby, the State Department has finally acknowledged CTA, Tibetan administration, and my office, which is democratically elected by Tibetans around the world. But informally, I do meet with government officials all over the world. Okay, so that's very interesting. Apu Lamu, could you now take the screen and tell us more about the repression, whatever we want to call it, of China in Tibet?
Thank you, Mr. Hawksley. And I also would like to thank Lord Charles Bruce, the president of the Democracy Forum, for inviting me to speak here today. I'm extremely honored, to be able to join with such distinguished speakers, including our Sikyong, the president of the Central Tibetan Administration, Dr. Lobsang Sangay, and honorable member of the British Parliament, Tim Loughton, and of course, a well-known researcher on Tibet, Kate Saunders. So My name is Apolabu. I was born in Tibet. My parents and family are still living there. So I follow the developments in my country and hometown all the more closely and with great passion. It is of great concern to me of what is happening in Tibet. To understand what's happening in Tibet, I believe one needs to look at the key policies and measures being implemented by the Communist Party of China in Tibet. So I would like to focus on three such key policies. The first that I'd like to focus on is the securitization policy through intimidation and enticement. And the second area that I'd like to focus on is the various measures and propaganda campaigns being carried out by the CCP to cynicize Tibetan Buddhism, and with special, of course, focus on monks and nuns. And the third measure that I'd like to focus on is the increasing governance and consolidation of Tibet's borders. So the CCP is using both intimidation in the form of massive surveillance systems and control measures on every walk of a Tibetan's life, and enticement, in the form of government subsidies, for example, investments, infrastructural developments, and awards and rewards to create a cooperative, compliant, and stable society. So, in the context of surveillance on Tibetans, surveillance systems on Tibetans, let me give you a little bit of background. The Communist Party of China, began to further intensify the level of surveillance and security control over Tibetans in Tibet in the aftermath of the Tibetan national uprising in 2008. So 4 years later, there was a change of communist guard in Tibet. Chen Kun-ko was appointed the new party secretary in June 2011. Now, he is a man, as we all know, is known for his hardline policies. So the first thing that he did after taking power in Tibet is that he rolled out a massive social stability strategy, or shall I say the triple S policy. The first, so there was a massive, number of recruitment in police force to securitize and to maintain social stability in Tibet. So, for instance, between 2011 and 2016, the Tibet Autonomous Region Party Committee under Chen Kun-ko employed over 12,000 police-related employments in so-called TAR. In fact, there was a popular joke among the local population in Lhasa, a sarcastic joke rather, that the city is now safer because all the criminals and thieves have been appointed either police officers, police informants, or government agents. So the another layer to the, I would say, to the pyramid of surveillance systems on Tibetans was the development of a grid-style social management system. So in other words, hundreds of what is known as convenience police posts were established with a distance less than 500 meters away from each other. So what this convenience police post does is to keep a check on quote unquote special risk groups. So these special risk groups includes those having faith or photo of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, those who advocates Tibetan independence, former political prisoners, and for suppressing political dissent, and those who have returned from the exiled Tibetan community in India. So at every block level of these convenience police posts, a fire extinguisher is installed. So any form of protest will invite security forces within 5 minutes at the scene. And then taxis in Tibet Autonomous Region are installed with artificial intelligence technology, such as facial recognition technology, to scan every passengers that rides in those taxis. In addition to this, level of surveillance system, another form of a system was developed called the Advanced Double-Linked Household System. So this is a kind of a carbon copy of a typical Orwellian colonial strategy. So what this strategy does is it makes natives watch over other natives, meaning Tibetans are made to watch other Tibetans, including their parents, family, friends, and neighborhood. So these are kind of surveillance systems being developed and are still being developed in Tibet to keep surveillance or to maintain social stability in Tibet, and this continues even today. So, according to a report published by the Tibet Daily early this year, there was another campaign added to the already strict surveillance system called 1 million police into 1 million household. So this campaign requires police officers to go to people's homes, Tibetan people's homes, deliver food items, and mediate disputes. And similarly, another report published just few days ago on October 7th this month by the Tibet Daily that said that a special joint action plan group was launched in Tibet for 2020 and across Ninti, Loka, Lhasa, Chamdo, Nakchu, and Ngari to combat what is known as illegal activities. And this special joint group, cracked down on again, quote unquote, separatist activities, especially in public places like internet cafes, restaurants, business premises, singing and dance clubs, nightclubs, and then bookstores, so on and so forth. So imagine you are being, under surveillance, even at entertainment venues such as, nightclubs, dance and singing clubs. The Tibetans inside Tibet, goes through this level of surveillance system on a daily basis. Another layer, to the surveillance system, although in a enticement in a favorable manner, is the inductment of various economic policies. As I mentioned in the beginning of my presentation, in the form of government subsidies, infrastructural developments, awards. For instance, there were reports that the Chinese government, the CCP, is planning to invest 1 trillion yuan on infrastructural developments in Tibet Autonomous Region alone. Similarly, award ceremonies are being organized every year in Tibet to celebrate to those individuals, organizations, or families who have contributed to national unity. And awards and subsidies are also being given to people who have inter-ethnic marriages, so meaning Han to Tibetan marriages. Similarly, many other measures and propaganda campaigns are being carried out to synthesize Tibetan Buddhism. So when Chen Kun-ko was appointed as the new party secretary of Tibet in 2011, various control measures, especially on religious institutions, monks and nuns, became even more apparent and strict. So he was of the opinion that Tibet's monasteries and the monks and nuns should act as a center of Chinese patriotism and should be a model to other general public. So they they have set 4 standards for all the monks and nuns in Tibet to follow, and these 4 standards are primarily to feel grateful to the party, to be loyal to the party, and to work as a bridge between common people and the party, and also to act as a patriotic and law-abiding citizen. So these are the 4 standards that all the monks and nuns should follow in Tibet. So Again, as part of his surveillance system, monastic management committees are stationed in all the monasteries and nunneries in Tibet. So these monastic management committees intervenes in the overall monastic affairs, including teaching and admission of monks and nuns, and the number of monks and nuns that can stay in a monastery, and also on important matters such as like the reincarnation of His Holiness 14th Dalai Lama and other Rinpoches and High Lamas. So in 2007, the CCP developed a long-term strategy to control the appointment of the 14 Dalai Lama's reincarnation, and that strategy or measure was known as the measures on the management of reincarnation of living Buddhas in Tibetan Buddhism. The irony of the matter is that that strategy requires all the Rinpoches, High Lamas, to be verified for its authenticity and approval by the Communist Party of China. Similarly, in this regard, the CCP is trying to give their appointed Panche Lama, he's known by the name Gensen Nobu. So he was given more visibility and higher profile lately to gain religious and political legitimacy of the Tibetans. So he concluded his a 3 month stay in Tibet, the longest probably the longest stay so far. So he concluded his 3 month stay in Tibet just yesterday. So while he was in Tibet, he visited the various prefectures of Tibet, including his hometown in Nakchu, Hari County. And then he also visited monasteries, interacted with people, conducted spiritual activities, and other, and met with officials, local officials in those counties and villages. Now, and the third that I would like to focus on is the CCP's strategy, or the various measures that CCP is implementing in Tibet to consolidate Tibet's borders. So the construction of what is known in Chinese as Shaokang villages. And it began primarily after the 19th Party Congress in 2007. And the emphasis on building more border villages is still in progress. For example, in the recently concluded Tibet, or the Work Forum on Tibet, Xi Jinping again emphasized on promotion and making exchanges between people in the border areas and people in other parts of Tibet and of China. So in 2017, during 19th Party Congress, Xi Jinping, out of a pool of letters sent by the people of China and other parts, like from Uyghur, from Tibet, so he selected a letter sent by a Tibetan family living in Yume, which is a border town of Lhunse County in Hoka, bordering India's Arunachal Pradesh. And he pulled out a letter of the family. And so, out of thousands of letters, what drew the attention of the president of China was the family's mention of their role in quote unquote safeguarding their village from from India's occupation. So therefore, from then on, the idea of building border defense villages came up to ensure consolidation of border areas and border security. So today, according to the housing and the construction development of the so-called Tibet Autonomous Region, about 628 border villages, especially in border areas of Tibet, Ningti, Hoka, Ngari, and Shigatsi. About 358 villages are already completed. And similarly, they were, yeah. Am I
Okay.
out of time?
Yes.
Well,
You're coming to the
yeah.
end now, so finish up the point. Yes, and then
All right.
I've got a
So,
couple of questions for you.
so there were a lot of high-profile visitors, leadership visitors from Beijing to Tibet, starting from May this year. Qi Yu, the Secretary of Foreign Ministry of China, visited Tibet in May. He emphasized on the need to consolidate and stabilize Tibet's border. Then in July, Wang Yang visited, and then again in August, on the eve of India's independence, Wang Yi visited Tibet. Similarly, other leaders from Beijing, like the vice chairman of CPP CC, visited Tibet, and then of course, as I mentioned, the Chinese appointed Panchen Lama is just concluded his visit to Tibet yesterday. So to conclude, as I am running out of time, I would like to say that in the current international political climate, it is great to see the research of some countries, including the United States, support to the Tibet issue. But I believe that Tibet issue is not simply about human rights or religious freedom, but also a issue of an entire nation under colonial occupation, as our Sekyong mentioned, and that the strategy and territorial integrity of Tibet is under invasion by the Communist Party of China. So Tibet is shouldn't be looked from the perspective of a pawn in a game of chess to be played to or against when a bilateral relation of a country is at stake with China, but rather it should be looked from the perspective of an important country geologically, geostrategically, and ecologically, at least in Asia. Thank you.
Thank you, Apath, very much for that insightful presentation there, which has gendered a number of questions. You talked about the native spying, the social stability, the colonial regime. A question has come in here that I don't want you to answer particularly, but I'd like the whole panel to think about, actually. It says, can you compare the brutal mess of the Chinese Communist Party cruelty to Tibetans, to other brutal dictators in the world like the Assad regime, and also to China itself? Are they treating Tibetans that much differently than they treat their own people if they cross that line? But I'd like to ask you a personal question, if I could, before we move on to Tim Lawton. You're in India at the moment, which we're also hearing about as becoming more of a closed society like that. Are you afraid at any time that your sanctuary that Tibetans are giving in India might be cut off if any deal is struck between Beijing and New Delhi on that issue?
I think India, since our since the arrival of our leader, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and about 80,000 of Tibetans in India, the Indian government has been very kind to provide the settlements, then schools, subsidies on education and everything. But I would definitely say that that India should make the Tibet question as a core issue in its bi-relation with China, not just in times of when the bilateral relations between India and China is at stake, and then the Tibet issue is being raised in the public domain,
Okay.
as well as at
So
government.
India should keep it as a sort of leverage, as high on that agenda in all its dealings with China.
Not just a leverage, it should make in Tibet the Tibet question as one of the core issues in its bilateral relations generally, not just when the issue of when its bilateral relation with China is at stake. So I mean it should make Tibet as one of the core issues.
Okay, and you feel safe at the moment that your sanctuary in India will be honoured?
I feel safe. Yeah.
Okay, okay, that's great. I'm moving on now to we're going from New Delhi to autumnal leafy Sussex in the south of England, where Tim Lawton, Conservative MP, co-chair of the all-party parliamentary group on Tibet, he's going to explain to us the discussions that are going on in Parliament, which is very important because here is a Western democracy. How important is Tibet in those discussions, and will it have any impact? Tim Lawton, the screen is yours.
Well, Humphrey, thank you very much. And thank you to the Democracy Forum for organising this event on a really important subject. And it's great to share the platform with old friends like the Sikyong and Kate Saunders, and really interesting and alarming to hear what Apa Lamu has just said about the totalitarian and surveillance society that Tibet has become. Charles Bruce stole some of my thunder, but I just wanted to flag up a few of the things that are going on in the UK Parliament that I've been involved in, and the all-party parliamentary group for Tibet, which I co-chair. I think it's been interesting that I've been in Parliament for 23 years. I've been a member of the all-party parliamentary group for Tibet for virtually all that time, and I've chaired it for the last 5 years. And very often one's felt like a lone voice, and when we've tried to raise the subject of Tibet in Parliament, there'll be just a handful of members there flying the flag for Tibet and raising the whole issue of human rights abuses by the Chinese. That's all too familiar. The track record of the now, I think, more than 1 million Tibetans who've lost their lives at the hands of the Chinese since the invasion in the 1950s. The whole Sinicization process, which Apa just alluded to, be it in the suppression of culture, of religion, the language, the new laws that came out of the Tibetan People's Congress at the beginning of this year, the regulations on the establishment of a model area for ethnic unity and progress in the Tibet Autonomous Region. And I use the word autonomous completely lightly. Sinicization, despite the guarantees supposedly in the Chinese constitution about respecting the culture and heritage of the various parts that make up the huge country of China. We've tried to raise the environmental impact that China is having. The Sikyong touched on the fact that something like 1/3 of the world's population are refreshed from water sources that rise in the Tibetan plateau, and the huge amount of overdevelopment and environmental carnage that is being wreaked there will have big implications, not just for Tibet, for China, but for the whole planet. And so the environmental angle on all of this is really important. And the way that the infrastructure spend that's gone on in Tibet purely as a means of bringing in the Chinese and Chinese industry to completely swamp the native Tibetan population. All that is just hugely alarming, and the suppression of freedom of religion as well. So just 2 weeks ago, we had a debate in the second chamber of the House of Commons called the Westminster Hall. It was a debate on China's rapid expansion of the Labour programme in Tibet, which again the Sikyong touched on, and the chamber was full. And it was a rare joy to see so many people across all the parties within the UK Parliament now taking a real interest and coming slightly late to the party, but they are there in the oppression that's going on in Tibet, and being prepared to call out China for the abuses that they are committing. And this extraordinary program that the Chinese authorities have ordered not only the nomads and the goat farmers to give up their lifestyles. All the Tibetan goats were killed as part of this, and the nomads and farmers are now being effectively incarcerated in these re-education camps. I mean, if we try to put it in Western terms, it's the equivalent of the Westminster Parliament ordering all the Welsh lamb hill farmers to slaughter all their lambs and to go into security camps to retrain as shop assistants or something like that. And it's being done by China in the name of alleviating poverty. It's nothing to do with that. It's all about the Sinization and standardization of the parts of Tibet which don't fit in with the Chinese model, and it needs to be called out for what it is. So that was a really welcome debate, but it was just one of many opportunities we've actually seen in Parliament over recent months where the subject of China has come up. So last week there was another debate on the fate of the Uyghurs, and I think that more than most things recently has really pricked up the ears of people. That mass incarceration, now probably well over 1 million, in what is, for all intents and purposes, concentration camps, caught out by satellite images when China tried to deny it. The forced sterilization program of Uyghur women, which I think many of us would make a case that qualifies for genocide under the various UN definitions. And that issue has come up in Parliament a lot and is now coming up in correspondence from our constituents who may not have heard of Uyghurs or even know where Tibet is, but now it's on the radar so much more extensively. And of course, in the UK, with our attachment to Hong Kong, the oppression that's been going on in Hong Kong, the complete disregard for the Anglo-China agreement on Hong Kong for the 50 years after the handover back in 1997, free speech being wiped out, and Hong Kong in danger of going the same way of other parts of central China. And of course, the great cause célèbre earlier this year in the UK Parliament was the role of Huawei, a huge and powerful Chinese company, which has many tentacles in many telecommunication infrastructures around the world, including in the UK. And the government is coming with a new 5G network in the UK, and Huawei was going to be central to that. I'm glad to say, because of, I'm sure, all of the attention that's been given to the human rights abuses, the use of Huawei technology in Xinjiang province for monitoring of the Uyghurs, and I'm sure in Tibet as well, that contract was questioned, and many of us in Parliament threatened to vote against it. And after a lot of pressure, I'm glad to say that the government changed its mind, and Huawei will not be part of the 5G project in the future. So actually, at the moment, hardly a week goes by without some aspect of Chinese oppression, flouting of human rights, and the way they expand their tentacles is coming up in the United Kingdom Parliament, and that is a real achievement. But also, China uses very insidious methods, and it's the influence of China in boardrooms in the United Kingdom and across many other countries as well, where highly paid senior businessmen and women are placed on boards in Huawei and others, taking the Chinese shilling, as we would call it, to stand up for China, but not be prepared to stand up to China on questioning their methods. So we've also raised the whole issue about their influence, not just in boardrooms, but in university campuses as well, and the use of, again, the very insidious Confucius institutes, which they've been much better at calling out in the States, in Canada, where again, they're wielding great influence and trying to buy influence amongst students and amongst schools, amongst academics as well. And then recently, we've also been raising the issue of the mass protests by the ethnic Mongolians within China, who are protesting about the proposed abolition of the use of the Mongolian language within their schools, the conversion forcibly to Mandarin, the suppression of and closing down of Mongolian social media sites, and so on. And then another issue which we've raised is all about the asset stripping we've seen in so many East African countries in particular, where China comes into poorer developing countries, showers them with money, buys access, and strips the assets. But also, of course, it's beyond just China and Tibet itself, where they've been using technology to intimidate the Tibetan diaspora around the world, the surveillance of social media and the interception of mobile phones and everything to go with it. And so I'm really glad that the UK Parliament Foreign Affairs Select Committee is currently undertaking a study about the Chinese influence and abuse of human rights. And my goodness, it's got an awful lot of material to go through, and that's going to be a very big and important study. And of course, I haven't mentioned there at all COVID and China's influence, malign influence on the road from on the world, and what happened with COVID. So what are we doing about it? Well, one of the things that I think has been really significant was the bill of the Tibet Reciprocal Access Bill, which came into Congress a couple of years ago, was passed cross-party unanimously across both houses with the support of people as disparate as Marco Rubio, the Republican, and Jim McGovern on the Democrat side. And that bill essentially said that if China's not going to allow access to journalists, politicians, diplomats to see, to go into areas where there are human rights abuses in Tibet, then there should be consequences. And Chinese officials should be banned from, in that case, coming into the states if they're not going to reciprocate on that access. And that's a really important piece of legislation. It's clearly worked, because I gather Marco Rubio and Jim McGovern have been banned from going to China, and I think I would wear that as a badge of honor. And now, of course, they've brought in further legislation about the recognition of Tibet as well. Well, I produced our version of that bill, the Tibet Reciprocal Access Bill, which I proposed in Parliament. It has support of MPs from all the major parties, and it's basically taken that legislation from the States and rewritten it into British parliamentary terms. Now, this is only a private member's bill, it's not government legislation, but I hope that with everything that has gone on and with the influence and the importance of the American bill, we can use it to get the government to perhaps look at adopting such legislation officially. And I think that would send out a very clear message if we have important countries like the States, like the UK, and hopefully a number of other European countries as well, who would adopt similar legislation to make a real point to China that you are being called out. We're also, I think, calling in a number of other parliaments across the world for a UN special investigation into China's genocide and the use of slave labor within Tibet and Xinjiang and other parts of China. And then a really important aspect, which is something which we've again brought in the UK Parliament recently, is the Magnitsky legislation, named after the Russian lawyer who was killed by the Russian government for questioning the corruption going on in that country. And we have now brought that legislation in so that where there are individuals in various countries that are guilty of corruption, they are being called out, and there are implications for those governments. It's been applied in Russia, in Saudi Arabia, and others so far, and we are very much hoping that there will be Chinese candidates as well who will be the subject of that legislation. I think what that says is an international effort, particularly amongst parliamentarians, is really, really important. Last year, when the world was in a normal place and we were able to get together, a number of parliamentarians from around the world, including myself and Chris Law, my co-chair MP in the British Parliament, went to Riga and met up with other parliamentarians from around the world to push the cause for the freedom and recognition of the atrocities in Tibet. We signed up to a Riga declaration which requests China to give unimpeded access to Tibet to foreign journalists, scholars and researchers, diplomats and other foreign citizens, including those of Tibetan origin, and calls on China to cease its policies and practices that harm the natural environment of the Tibetan plateau and to resume the dialogue with envoys of His Holiness the Dalai Lama without preconditions. That was the start, I think, of seeing much greater cooperation, and then we've seen it by the recent forming of something called the International Parliamentary Alliance on China, IPAC, including a lot of MPs within the UK Parliament, including myself. And we have been working together across parliaments to bring parallel pressure to bear, to expose some of the atrocities that have been going on. In fact, it was an IPAC sponsored piece of research that revealed the whole issue around the Tibetan goat farmers, and to work together to embolden politicians and governments to call out China for its abuses. So there's a lot, I have to say, that is going on, and it's long overdue and not before time. But only by working together, I think, can we call out China, say that your practices within your own borders are completely acceptable. Your attempts to influence and suppress free speech and tolerance and fair practices across the rest of the world is completely unacceptable, and it must stop. And so, in conclusion, thank you again to the Democracy Forum for giving another platform to allow us to relay what is going on and to hear from some real experts about what is going on in Tibet, and to give assurances to the Tibetan people around the world and the supporters of Tibet that their cause is the cause of all peace-loving, democracy-loving, free speech loving people across the whole world. And they need to be supported, they needed to be defended and protected. And you do that not by kowtowing to China, but by calling out China and standing up to China. And that time is now.
That and a lot of material that you managed to get in there, particularly the feeling like a lone voice and less so feeling like a lone voice. Now we've had a number of questions, and I'd like to encapsulate them into this one. Is that why can the Western democracies not recognize Tibet as an independent nation? Now, we here might know that, but perhaps you could talk us through what Britain has a special recognition of Tibet, and why that would be an absolutely impossible thing to do.
It's not an absolutely impossible thing to do, but it is quite a nuclear button. And of course, things have developed over the last few years when His Holiness the Dalai Lama effectively stood down as the political leader of the Tibetan people, and is the spiritual leader of the Tibetan people, and we have a Sikhyong with the parliament in exile. The claim for Tibet to be a completely independent country was watered down by His Holiness himself. His Holiness was putting forward a middle way where Tibet would be recognized within China, but absolutely an autonomous, genuinely autonomous part of China, with all its practices and beliefs respected. Now, some of us would like it to be a fully independent country, but in the modern world, if we're to make any progress, then China absolutely wouldn't have that. Britain, of course, does have a unique place, as you've said, and Britain had, and we have proof of it, back in the 30s, diplomatic relations with Tibet. People had Tibetan passports or British passports with Tibetan stamps in it. So traditionally, Britain has had a role right back into the 19th century where a rather unfortunate British military group tried to invade Tibet, not very successfully. But we've always recognized that, that Tibet has always been an independent country. It was never always part of China, as the Chinese now completely falsely try to rewrite history.
Well, what is the phrase there, Tim Lawton? Is we recognize the suzerainty, isn't it? Of
the suzerainty, yes, a very old colonial world suzerainty. Yes.
Yes, I just wanted to, before I move on to Kate Saunders, you were talking about the Confucius Institutes. And as I was trawling through researching that the other day, I found out that a prep school called Wrigglesworth Hall, which is Lady Diana's old prep school in Norfolk, was bought a few years back by one of the Confucius Institutes. So they are getting very much into our society and education system. Kate Saunders now has got some slides. She's going to do a show and tell on us about the latest trends and developments in Tibet, military-style training, the labor transfers that we've talked about. So, Kate Saunders, the screen and the slideshow is yours.
Thank you, Humphrey, and lovely to see you again. Thank you so much to the Democracy Forum for inviting me, and to Lord Bruce and my other esteemed panelists. So, China has a phrase which it's been using rather a lot recently, and it's telling Tibet's story to the world. And the state-run newspaper, the Global Times, tells us that the party has developed new and creative methods for telling Tibet's story to the world in the 21st century. Inside Tibet, the CCP aims to break connections, tear up cultural roots, and instill the red gene, and they've reached a new level. And this is in the context of a policy arc from the so-called patriotic education campaigns of the 1990s. And just as the CCP seeks to change Tibetan minds, they're trying to change ours too. Maybe Vineet, if you could just hold on that slide for a minute. In a global context, China has used the crisis of the COVID-19 pandemic to wage political, or as the CCP authorities frame it, unrestricted information warfare, which is intending to secure strategic advantage and global preeminence. And China portrays itself not as the country that allowed COVID-19 to spread unchecked for weeks, but as the country that defeated the virus and can now save the world. And to do so, the PRC has deployed a full spectrum battery of tactics using covert and overt means, including disinformation, censorship, spreading conspiracy theories, whipping up nationalism, and seeking to cultivate an amnesia among its own citizens to make way for the acceptance of an official narrative of China's heroic victory over the coronavirus. And these are strategies and methods that are well advanced in different ways in Tibet and in Uyghur areas. So before Xinjiang, there was Tibet, and Vineet, it's fine to go on with these slides quite slowly as you wish. The top party boss in Xinjiang, Chen Quanguo, a soldier turned politician, developed one of the world's most dystopian police states in Tibet, as we've heard from Apalamo and other panelists. And this is how Chen Quanguo sees Tibet. He sees it as an ethnic border region, so at the forefront of the anti-separatist struggle. He sees Tibet as the teeth of the storm in the struggle of the ideological realm. Powerful language. These methods were implemented after Tibet and escalated in Xinjiang, and are now being reintroduced back into Tibet at an even larger scale than before. This feedback loop of assimilation threatens the survival of a cultural and religious civilization and the lives of millions as never before. It also demonstrates the clear and present danger that China's networked authoritarianism presents beyond its borders. The CCP, after all, has rarely sought to persuade. The party term rectification means to break from within. And there's a chilling statement from an official document stating that party's aims in Xinjiang, which also apply to Tibet, are breaking lineage, breaking roots, breaking connections, and breaking origins. There are many reasons for us to pay more attention to Tibet. Tibet is not a marginal issue for Beijing. It's not only regarded as a core issue of the PRC's territorial sovereignty, but also as a matter of China's national security. And it's of increasing geopolitical importance. So China's policies in Tibet emerge from these imperatives, which I'll summarize as follows. They seek to raise the productivity of the core industrial cities of Xi'an, Chongqing, and Chengdu at the foot of the plateau. They're seeking the expansion of mining based on rich resources of Tibet, most notably uranium, lithium, and gold. and in order to fuel China's economic development, and importantly, to address the progressive scarcity of water resources in the north and northeast of China, with water sourced in Tibet. Tibet's the world's highest and largest plateau. That's a NASA image that you can see there, and the source of most of Asia's major rivers, as some of the panelists have already specified. Tibet's a global climate change epicenter and the Earth's third pole. Another factor is control over its borders, and coinciding with recent border tensions, China has accelerated construction of the border defense villages that Apa Lamo spoke about. And that's part of a far-reaching agenda by Xi Jinping to create an advanced, impenetrable security barrier between Tibet and the outside world. So new findings in Tibet that were made public on the world stage by IPAC and by the scholar Adrian Zentz show that the Tibet Autonomous Region introduced new policies to promote the systematic, centralized and large-scale training and transfer of rural surplus laborers, as they were defined, to other parts of the TAR. These slides show Xi Jinping visiting some settled Tibetan villages in Qinghai when he made a trip there a couple of years ago. So in the first 7 months of this year, the region had trained over 500,000 rural surplus laborers through this policy. And China claims that this is part of its poverty alleviation methods, but as in Uyghur areas, the mass programs are accompanied by a major focus on indoctrination, on ideological training, and intensive surveillance. So there are important differences still remaining between Beijing's approach to Xinjiang and to Tibet. So there is the evidence that Tibet's scheme, at present, there is no evidence that this scheme is linked to extrajudicial internment on a mass scale, as in Uyghur areas. And aspects of the labor transfer mechanisms are potentially less coercive. But the new developments also represent an acceleration of policies displacing nomadic pastoralists in Tibet from the grasslands. And that's a massive social engineering program that has been ongoing now for 2 decades. It's reached an advanced stage in eviscerating a sustainable way of life that is uniquely suited to the harsh conditions and landscape of the Tibetan plateau. And China blames Tibetan nomads for the degradation of Tibet's vast grasslands. Maybe we could stay on that slide for a second more. But so China blames the Tibetan nomads for the destruction of grasslands and the environment. But the IPCC and experts across the world, including in China too, disagree. And that reflects a scientific consensus that mass removal of pastoralists on this scale from their land is extremely damaging, because indigenous stewardship and herd mobility are essential to both the health of the rangelands and also climate change mitigation. So policies in Xinjiang can best be understood in parallel to those in Tibet. In 2008, as other panelists have spoken about, a wave of overwhelmingly peaceful protests swept across the Tibetan plateau, and that propelled Tibet to the top of the international news agenda at the time of the Beijing Olympics. Governments at that point started to take Tibet more seriously as a political issue, and that approach was compounded by the wave of self-immolations that swept across Tibet from 2009 onwards. More than 150 Tibetans have set fire to themselves, calling for freedom and for the Dalai Lama to return to Tibet. Now, before then, Chinese officials had sought to project the notion that only a handful of Tibetans, mostly monks and nuns, had caused unrest in Tibet, influenced by the Dalai Lama. But after 2008, as in Xinjiang, an entire ethnic group is now targeted, as opposed to individuals labeled by the control state as so-called extremists. And surveillance technology by one of the world's biggest CCTV companies, Hikvision, was deployed. Now, Hikvision provided a system for the railway in Lhasa well before its use in prison camps in Xinjiang. And as Tim is well aware, it also provides some video surveillance cameras for the House of Commons here in London. And this strategy was combined with the deployment of tens of thousands of party cadres in monasteries, schools and homes, with the aim of literally rewiring Tibetan thoughts and beliefs. So in a major policy meeting on Tibet, which happened at the end of August, this is called the Tibet Work Forum, and it sets policies for the next 5 to 10 years. Xi Jinping underlined instructions to sinicize Tibetan Buddhism. And that follows a tightening of control over reincarnation, as indicated in the publication of a database in 2016, which detailed all of the lamas who were allowed to reincarnate with government permission. If you don't have government permission, you're not allowed to reincarnate. So imagine a life in which your deepest thoughts and loyalties are targeted by the state. And this slide shows the global branded Intercontinental Hotel in Lhasa, which is adjacent to the Gutsa Detention Center, which is one of the most feared centers for the torture and imprisonment of Tibetan monks, nuns, and political prisoners. And in Tibet today, a control state coexists with mass Chinese domestic tourism on the plateau. So Chen Guangguo in both Tibet and Xinjiang presided over the punishment of officials, and as he put it, who have fantasies about the 14th Dalai clique and those who follow the 14th Dalai clique. So even your thoughts are not your own. 2 years later in Xinjiang, a campaign was also launched against two-faced officials who presented a different public and private face to the world, and those who exhibit political disloyalty. And that resulted in the arrest of many prominent Uyghurs, for instance, some in Xinjiang University. But the difference now is that hyper-securitization and militarization are no longer deemed to be enough to control Tibet or Xinjiang. Mass re-education has become an integral element of the coercive new politics. And videos have circulated. Vineet, I wonder if you could show this video now before we conclude with the rest of the slides. We don't know mostly what happens in the vocational training camps or in the re-education centers that are across Tibet, these new party building facilities. But a rare video which emerged a couple of years ago from Tibet showed a group of nuns in military fatigues, and they were nuns who had been apparently expelled from the major Buddhist institute of Larangar. And here they were singing songs in honor of Chairman Mao. And I don't know if you have that video there. Thanks, Vineet. And maybe if you could just leave that slide up and I'll make the concluding points. So the obsessive party mantra of ensuring so-called stability has come to mean something much more than total compliance to party diktats and the crushing of all dissent. It now also refers to the creation of a society in which dissent is not even thought about, as ideas that differ from those of the party state are seen as the root causes of instability. Xi Jinping has reinvigorated ideology to an extent not seen since the Cultural Revolution. And China watcher John Garneau commented that politics isn't everything, but there's no country on earth where they are more omnipresent than in China, with the exception possibly of North Korea. And there is no political system that is as tightly bound to ideology as the PRC. So there has been a real shift in both the institutional and the policy direction emanating from Beijing on Tibet. And what is happening in both Xinjiang and Tibet is the leading edge of a new, much more coercive ethnic policy under Xi Jinping's new era of Chinese power. And it is one that seeks to accelerate the political and the cultural transformation of non-Han ethnic minorities. Every policy now aims towards the evisceration of what is distinctive and unique about Tibetan and Uyghur identity. And of course, no one, Tibetans or Uyghurs, feels safer as a result. If we look at the area where Tibet has traditionally wielded influence beyond its borders for centuries, that is through Tibetan Buddhism. The identity and loyalty to the Dalai Lama goes deep, and the CCP knows it must too, to counter that. So the demonization of religion and the Dalai Lama underpins China's Tibet policies, and hence the 5-year plan of Sinicizing Tibetan Buddhism in Tibet, Islam in Xinjiang, and religion across the PRC. Can Tibetans hold their ground? There is every evidence that despite these efforts towards breaking the lineage, breaking the connections, breaking the roots, that they are succeeding in numerous respects in claiming and maintaining a space in which to protect their cultural and religious and national identity. A new generation is reimagining, redefining what it is to be Tibetan. The power of Tibetan Buddhism to transform is now set against the zealous, cult-like ideology of the CCP party control state. While the resistance was visible in 2008, it is far less so now, and perhaps you can show the concluding slides. Tibetan historian Tsering Shakya has written of a Tibetan term meaning smile in the face, fire in the belly. China's state media shows singing and dancing Tibetans and Uyghurs, and they depict Lhasa as the happiest city in the whole of China. And that's aimed at showing the smile on the face of Tibetans. But resistance can take many, many forms, and the fire in the belly is not always visible. The acts of turning away or not giving face that are implicit in the Tibetan term for resistance represent a refusal to recognize something that they believe is not scarcely worth recognition, despite the demands of the powerful state for demonstrations of submission and compliance. And I'll conclude there. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. That was absolutely fast, quite chilling, actually. Just before we move on to more general stuff, that the company you said that was doing the surveillance around the House of Commons, but also the surveillance in Tibet. Tell a little bit more about that.
It's a Chinese company a Chinese state-run company called Hikvision. And one of the slides early on, I probably should have included it later, showed how it can distinguish in its facial recognition system between ethnic minorities and Chinese Han people. And it's It's a huge company, very influential. It has cameras not only in Parliament, but also in shops like Tesco's in the UK. Although, of course, the purpose in Tibet and China is much more sinister. There was a debate in Parliament some months ago about that very issue. And I gather that there had been a contract to expand the use of those cameras in Portcullis House. But I don't think that contract went ahead. Tim, I think you were involved in that.
I was going to say, yes.
Yeah.
Tim Lawton, do you have a view on this?
I don't think it has gone ahead, and you've reminded me, I must catch up on that. Yeah, my view is we know how China uses technology for surveillance purposes. You know, once they're in a telecommunications infrastructure, they make an awful lot of mobile phones that people in the West use, and they produce CCTV equipment as well. And I'm sure it's doing rather more than it's supposed to do.
And in your view, these cameras should be now changed around Parliament, Tesco's, and they should just be put out because of what they're doing, or should they?
I can't speak for Tesco's, and I'm not sure what secret data they're gathering about the frozen goods section in the stores. But certainly in Parliament, they should have no place.
What I'd like to do now, thank you everybody on the panel, is try to separate this out into two issues, really. We've heard a lot about the Tibet, the poverty alleviation, the repression, and the dreadful, the Kate and Appa, these general scenarios that we saw from them. I would like to start, I think, by asking by Dr. Lobsang Sangay, because you are the Tibetan government, two things really. One, how much do you think Tibet is being treated differently to other places in China, Xinjiang's one, but also the Han Chinese places that might be seen as a threat to the Chinese Communist Party? And secondly, if you could dovetail that, if Tibet was recognized as a free nation, but you know that you're squeezed between India and China wouldn't like it at all, how do you think you would be able to survive as a government of an independent Tibet?
Number one, I think the discrimination against Tibetans are very clear. Tibetans are treated as second-class citizens. In Lhasa, the capital city of Tibet, there are signboards which says that if you are Chinese, we give you, let's say, 100 RMB a day. If you are Tibetan, we give you 50 RMB a day. How would British people feel if the signboard in London saying, if you are Chinese, we give you 100 pounds a day, and if you're British, we give you 50 pounds a day?
It's all done a little bit under the table in Britain, but we do have similar problems. I mean, that might be, but is that also happening as far as you know in Xinjiang or in Mongolia and places like that? Or
I think it's the same thing, because I participated and organized many conferences with our Uyghur and Mongolian brothers, sisters. All you need to do is close your eyes. Dates are almost exactly the same, policies are exactly the same, systematic application of repressive policies are exactly the same. Actually, this is cultural assimilation, where they want to make all these different places into Chinese provinces. So, for example, let me give you an example. If there are 20 staff members in one department in Tibet Autonomous Region, if 2 are Chinese, 18 are Tibetans, they all will communicate in Chinese language whenever they have meetings, even though 10 Tibetans don't speak Chinese, don't understand Chinese. So this kind of force, culture or language on Tibetans are palpable. In Lhasa, a capital city, perhaps 95% of shops and restaurants and hotels or small businesses are owned or run by Chinese.
Okay.
So that kind of discrimination are blatant in all, Uyghur area and Mongolian area and Tibetan areas. Now,
sorry, just to move on, you might have been getting onto it. Is it viable to think that your government in exile could move in and govern the successful Tibet?
Now, since 1992, we have made it very clear that our goal is to restore basic freedom of the Tibetan people, restore genuine autonomy for the Tibetan people. When that day arrives, Tibet administration in Dharamsala will be dissolved. So I'm not working to restore my position in Tibet. I'm working to elevate the sufferings of 6 million Tibetans in Tibet. So this is our goal. Having said that, yes, we practice democracy given a choice. Tibetans in Tibet would like to have democracy. We know that. And if Tibet, were an independent country, of course we can govern ourselves. Nepal is a landlocked country. Bhutan is a landlocked country. There's some Mongolia is a landlocked country between two giants, but they all are doing fine. And for thousands of years, we ran our own government. When Tibet was free, we had our own postal system. We had our own judiciary. Not even a single case from Tibet went to China. And, we had our own system. We ran our government for thousands of years. Why can't we do it again?
Okay, that's thank you for that. Appa, I would like to move to you now because you're of a younger generation and you live in India. And I know that in India, over the years, there has been a lot of debate and discussion about why India has fallen behind China, why its roads aren't there and why its trains don't work, and why China's infrastructure and everything has become much better than India's, including its military, of course. All the panelists, I think, have spoken about this infrastructure building and poverty alleviation, and how poverty alleviation it equals repression. Could you give me more detail on that, please? Because at some stage, those roads have to get built, the dams have to be built, and as I said in my introduction here, there's always controversy over that. So why is Tibet an infrastructure building and a poverty alleviation different to anywhere else in the world?
Okay, so infrastructural developments, including roads, railways, and hospitals, schools are important to any country. But I think one needs to look at whom those infrastructural developments are benefiting for. For instance, in Tibet, the Chinese government has built this the railway line from Kumbu Gyamda to Lhasa, and now they're planning this railway line from Sutran to Lhasa, then Lhasa to Shikase. And the purpose of all these infrastructural developments, also mostly in the name of poverty alleviation, that they're trying to achieve by 2020, is primarily to benefit the Chinese government and to give employment to Chinese people, and they are bringing more Chinese.
Does it do nothing good? Is there nothing good about it at all? Is it a repressive lever, or is it mainly for the Chinese government? Yes, mainly for this, but does it help the Tibetans in any way whatsoever?
Of course, they are Tibetans who have benefited from them, but then one need to ask what kind of, if you have economic development, do you have political, civil, and religious rights? And also, I'm not denying the fact that there are some Tibetans, especially as I mentioned in my presentation, that there are rewards and awards be given to certain group of Tibetans for being police informants, for being government agents. In that case, they are more, benefiting more than the ordinary Tibetans in Tibet.
Just to get back to Dr. Lobsang Sangay, could I just come at you very quickly on that? Is if you were running Tibet at the moment, would you cancel all these infrastructure projects? What would you do with them?
Of course, development is necessary. We welcome development, but development for whom? If 90% of the shops, hotels, and restaurants in Lhasa are owned by Chinese are benefiting. So it all started with one road connecting China to Tibet. So in 1950s, Chinese government said that road will lead to progress and development and benefit Tibetan people. Right after the road was constructed, the tanks came, trucks came, guns came. That's how they occupied our country. Now, where is that one road? That road has led to 100 roads now, mainly, going towards our natural resources, gold, copper, uranium, you just name it, lithium. 70% of lithium of China comes from Tibet,
Sorry,
which is made
could
of.
you name,
So-
because many of our viewers and listeners here would know, could you name one infrastructure project that needs desperately to be built for the Tibetans that isn't being built?
Oh yes, and roads, railways, airports are all welcome, but they should be used to benefit Tibetan people. Railway lines should not.
Could you name one specific project? I'm sorry to interrupt, from going from one particular city to another, or an airport, something that is not being built that the Tibetan people, as you say, need.
Definitely. I mean, for example, monasteries are not just when Tibetans voluntarily build themselves. In the case of Larungar and Yashingar, but they are demolished by the Chinese government, right? So if you look at the Yashingar nunnery, you can Google the photograph, half the Yashingar is gone, right? So what we are trying to say is what Tibetans, build something for themselves are demolished, whereas other things that is built are, for the benefit of Chinese people.
Okay, thank you. Tim Lawton, we're getting a lot of questions in about democracy and human rights and what Britain can do and what Britain in liaison with India could do. You were very eloquent about some of the details there, but is this not becoming a bigger issue on the authoritarianism and democracy? And is there a risk of Tibet getting lost in that? And losing out to the sort of bigger issues of the US against China and the rest of it?
Well, I think, can I just make a point on the previous question? Because, of course, the thing that you've completely missed is all the infrastructure that's coming into Tibet is to make it easier for the Han Chinese to get into Tibet, not the other way around. Any Tibetan Chinese citizen from Beijing or whatever can freely travel anywhere in Tibet. If you're a Tibetan, you cannot freely travel anywhere in China, and you need travel permits as well. All of this is being imposed on Tibet, and it's the Chinese who are profiting from it, not the indigenous Tibetans, as the Sikyong has said. But in terms of the bigger issue, I think for many of us, Tibet is deeply symbolic about the way that China operates and the way that cultures can be oppressed. And when you suppress the language, the culture, the heritage, then you are trying to take over that country's soul and destroying that country. And we saw that, to quote another example, what ISIS was trying to do in Syria, when they were destroying the culture of that country, a heritage-rich country. Then you take away the soul of the people, and that's what China has done there. Okay, there's big geopolitical battles between communism and capitalism and China and America, but I think Tibet is probably the biggest single example of where a peace-loving group of people, a nation as it was, are having their freedoms snuffed out.
What can we, sorry to interrupt. What can, I mean, you've listed a lot of things there in your presentation, but what can we practically do about it? I mean, there's the sanctions legislation that's coming in, but and also, can we, Britain, be more nimble on this or forceful on this outside of the EU? And where does our voice stand in this sort of global pushback against China on supporting human rights and democracy?
Sure, I think we have got a role to, and I'm not going to go into the whole Brexit thing, but it was very interesting how the EU caved in to China over attributing the sources of the COVID epidemic, and they have rolled over to a lot of censorship there. We mustn't roll over. Now, the problem is, of course, that because of Chinese investments in the UK, as they have in so many parts of the world, and a lot of jobs that rely on Chinese markets, governments, local authorities, businesses are scared to speak up. But let's remember, we have a huge trade deficit with China. Ultimately, we are China's customers, and so we have to insist. Just as there's a big debate going on at the moment about the agricultural standards of food imports that we might come in trade agreements and animal welfare. Well, absolutely. Why are we not insisting on human rights practices, labor practices, where many of the things that we're importing in this country are produced by slave labor? We should call it out. We need complete transparency. And we shouldn't trade in some of those things unless that transparency is there. We should say to China, we are not buying those goods anymore. And we want to be able to inspect the way some of these things are produced. Hence, the basis of my bill that there should be reciprocal access.
Yes, so that's a very, very interesting. When will that bill likely see the light of day, if it does?
Well, it won't become law in itself, but because it's a private member's bill, and it rarely happens. But by having it on the parliamentary radar, we hope that the government may adopt it within legislation, human rights legislation, in the same way that the American government did as well. So it's an irritant on the parliamentary timetable to flag it up and to make sure that the government take notice of it.
And keeps the conversation alive. Saunders, you've been tracking this for many years, I know. And how would you say the ebbs and flows of interest and impact have done? And can you name anything that's actually changed or lessened Chinese policy on Tibet? I'll put it. Can you see any light at the end of the tunnel?
Yes, with the Tibetan people and the strong sense of Tibetan cultural religious identity. And I think it's true that the CCP state reaches deeper into people's private lives than ever before. And we are seeing an acceleration in every sphere of policies that seek to challenge and eviscerate even Tibetan identity. But at the same time, we are seeing Tibetans inside Tibet who are in very subtle ways or practical ways holding their ground. In terms of the question on development, there are many Tibetans that we can't ignore who are doing well in terms of involvement in tourism, in social enterprise, in promoting their own language, their own culture, in writing poetry that helps to articulate and amplify Tibetan experience. So what we're seeing is that there is a sense that Tibetans are holding their ground. In terms of the infrastructure, I think it's used both for military and civilian purposes. But what would really change the situation for Tibetans if there was, in a sense, a Tibetanization of development, in that more attention was paid to what Tibetans need. And that would also be in China's interest too. Xi Jinping says he wants an ecological civilization. And so that Tibet is very important to the planet, to the global environment. That fragile ecosystem up there on the high plateau is a climate change epicenter and of great geopolitical importance. So Tibetans who are working at the grassroots to protect and preserve their wildlife, their environment, that needs to be supported, not rolled over by these accelerated strategies to undermine.
At Apalama, we've got a couple of questions coming in here, which I'd like to put to you. The Tibetan issue, as we know, has been going on now since the 1950s, and there have been new generations have come up. The passion, the mindset, the loyalty, whatever you want to call it, to being a Tibetan, has that changed at all, or are the younger generation of Tibetans equally determined to keep their culture and heritage going, or are more and more of them going over to join the secret police or Chinese society and that kind of life? What's happening there?
the sense of Tibetan is even among youths. Or, for example, I came from Tibet when I was 9, and I am involved in the Tibetan freedom movement as much as the elder generation of the Tibetan society are. So I wouldn't say, although they are Tibetan youths going for more greener opportunities, but their sense of Tibetanness and their sense of Tibetan identity is as strong as ever before. And I wouldn't say that they have, kind of detached themselves from the Tibetan freedom movement at all. So I would say they are very much a part of the Tibetan freedom. In fact, more. If you see in the Tibetan diaspora, global diaspora, the youths, the involvement of Tibetan youth have become more stronger than, say, 5 years ago. So I would say Tibetan youths are very much part of the Tibetan freedom movement.
Okay, thank you. I just wonder, we're running a little bit out of time, but I'd like to ask you, Apple, and then I'd like to go around the panel very quickly to bring out a crystal ball, because China is now very much in our minds, much more, as Tim Lowton was saying, than it was a few years ago. Where do you see Tibet's hopes or its fears over, say, the next generation, the next 25 to 30 years? Do you feel it might change at all? Or do you see that we could still be having those same discussions then? Appa, could you answer that very briefly first up? Thank you.
Sorry, can you repeat? I didn't get.
Yeah, 25 years from now, where do you think the situation with Tibet will be? Will China have succeeded? Will the Western democracies have succeeded? Will the Tibetan people have succeeded?
Well, what goes up must come down, right? The CCP may be a powerful economic power now, but every regime, nobody expected the Soviet Union to collapse, or nobody expected the German wall to fall, the Berlin Wall to fall. So similarly, I think China cannot stand as it is, in terms of economic power today, after, say, 25 years later. So that would be my answer.
You think it'll be a lot better 25 years from now?
Who knows? Maybe nobody can predict the future, but I'm optimistic. So are the Tibetans around the world.
Kate Saunders, what's your view on that?
I would say a number of things. I suppose we have a global climate emergency. 25 years is a long time, and at that time it may be too late to deal with the ecological crisis, because you'd be looking at, with the scarcity of water in northern China, you may be looking at Beijing being uninhabitable for after some years' time, and reliant very much on the water of Tibet's plateau. So it's in their interest to protect that landscape instead of building the infrastructure and the hydro dams and so on. So His Holiness the Dalai Lama is 85 now. So this is a very critical next 5 years, I would say. Also, Xi Jinping has appointed himself chairman for life. As Apo Lama says, nothing is certain. The Tibetans believe everything is impermanent. But the next 5 years are crucial to how this momentous struggle between the CCP and a new generation of Tibetans adopting more creative means to defend their identity. I would say that the next 5 years is crucial, and it's only then we'll understand how 25 years looks.
Yes, I think the next 5 years is going to be critical generally, isn't it, for the rise or balance of China, or the survival, as some call it, of the liberal democratic West. Tim Lowton, what's your view on that?
It's a big question. I agree with a lot of what Kate said. I think there are three factors here. If you think that it was just over 25 years ago, the Soviet Union was still almighty, and who would have thought that superpower would have imploded as it did, and it was eventually, effectively, it went bust, which was what undermined it, and that pressure for democracy amongst young people. China is hugely powerful. It has tentacles throughout the whole globe in terms of economic investments and industrial investments, more so perhaps than the Soviet Union was. But I think two key things are, as Kate has just said, the environment. I mean, China cannot live in an environmental bubble. The environment has become, post-COVID, the biggest challenge facing the whole planet. And if China does not do its bit, and Tibet is absolutely crucial within that, it will be called out. And the populations around the world have the ability to vote with their wallets and not to buy Chinese products. And if they do that, and they're not very environmentally friendly, many of their products, then China will start to feel it in their purse. The other key thing, I think, which is really significant at the moment, is what's going on in Hong Kong. I mean, Hong Kong is a completely different culture to China. Hong Kong has been part of the capitalist West, innovative international markets, outward looking. If they try and completely suppress Hong Kong to the state that they have done and are doing with Tibet and the Uyghurs and everybody else, it will be hugely more significant. And that could just be the straw that breaks the camel's back. So what they do with Hong Kong is going to be hugely significant. Remember, it's only 23 years ago when they brokered that deal with the UK and took over Hong Kong. It's taken them less than 25 years to completely renege on that. Things can turn around in 25 years or less.
Yeah, that's interesting. So we've got the Kate's 5-year thing. We've got the Hong Kong, which could all happen. That Dr. Lobsang Sangay is the president of the Central Tibetan Administration, and in the absence of Barry Gardner, who usually sums up these things, can I give you the last word? If you could tell us what you might have learned from this discussion, and give us a thought for the next few years forward, as I mentioned.
Thank you, Mr. Humphrey. Actually, we are Tibetans. We believe in law of karma. So what goes around comes around. So yeah, this panel is hosted from London. At one time, British Empire said, "Sun never sets," and here we are. So what you see seemingly impossible will be possible, and it won't take 25 years. I think it will take less than that, because human rights is universal, democracy is inevitable. And I think the turn point is already happening. Recently, the Pew Research Survey came out with the poll. And then 3 years ago, when I was in Canada, I was surprised, in fact, shocked to see that 63 or 4% of Canadians trusted Chinese government and Chinese leadership. Now, the latest Pew Research Survey says 74% to 75% to 80 to 84% people in 24 different countries distrust or mistrust China. So the trust deficit has already happened. Their biggest PR nightmare has already happened, mainly because of this pandemic, right? So already the law of karma is kicking in, and it won't take 25 years. Sooner than that, we will see His Holiness Dalai Lama return to Lhasa, and 6 million Tibetans will be greeting him. And Mr. Humphrey and Lord Bruce, you will be in Lhasa very soon. That's our dream, that's our wish, that's our aspiration, and we will keep at it. Even though I'm quarantined in a community quarantine center, I just came back yesterday from US. I'm heavily jet lagged, but this is our fight, a non-violent one, a peaceful one, for just cause. And we will prevail sooner than later.
Thank you very much indeed. That was a good, optimistic. What comes round goes round, and the sense of karma. So thank you all very much. I have learned a lot from this discussion, and I hope that we've had a lot of people in, and a stream of questions. I'm sorry of all those that I haven't been able to put up or address, but I hope we've encapsulated the main issues here. Democracy Forum has got 2 similar seminars coming up. For the next one in November is Understanding Chinese Military Posturing, Has It Impeded the Economic Rise of Asia?, which is very salient to what we've been discussing today. And in December, the Democracy Forum moves to Afghanistan with a single question: Taliban at the helm, question mark. There's also a new Democracy Forum app which you can download, and that will give you access to the Democracy Forum and to Asian Affairs, the sister magazine. We've got a small video on that we're going to show right at the end. But meanwhile, thank you, Democracy Forum. Thank you for our panelists, and thank you for all of you that have partook in this and put in your questions and your insights on the future of Tibet. Thank you.
Lord Bruce, President of the Democracy Forum, invites you to attend our next virtual seminar in November 2020 on understanding Chinese military posturing. Has it impeded the economic rise of Asia? Followed by another seminar in December 2020 on Afghanistan, Taliban at the helm? Please stay tuned. Further details to be announced shortly. The events will broadcast live from our social media channels.